How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the shop. So I've got a little bit of a different video lined up. Typically I do not talk in these, but on this video we're going to have some voiceover and explanation of what's happening because this project is a little too complicated to just film. What we're making is a pull cue rack that holds 12 cues. It'll hold a set of pull balls, and then it also holds the rack, or the triangle that you rack up the pull balls with. So let's just jump right in and let me take a few minutes here to explain how we'll use the X-Carve and what parts we'll be carving, and then we'll just go right into this and get started. Okay, so here's a look in Sketchup. I've drawn up the pull cue. This is a wall hanging unit, and like you can see here, this is a bottom shelf, and each one of these little holes will hold the butt of the cue, and then it locks in at the top. I'll have little plastic clips that go in there. And then also we've got the shelves here that hold the pull balls, and you've got a little space down here to put what you might need, and then a rod here to hold your rack. These three pieces are what are going to go on the machine. It'll start with the lower shelf. So what we'll have to do is, this part is like 49 long. It's way too long for the X-Carve. So we'll have to break it in half. That's why I've marked this line here, and I'm only exporting this side of this piece. So this will be this corner, the center point of my actual workpiece will be the homing point for the machine, and so it's going to hang off the machine. I'll carve this side, flip the piece over, and carve the other side. But that generally is how it's going to do. We're going to start this project by loading up this bottom shelf and starting with it. Try to cut all of that, and while it's rolling, we'll jump in and work on this cabinet here and get these dados cut and work on these mortises. So let's just jump right in and get started. Okay, start by homing the machine, like I said, at that center point on the board on the edge. If you're hearing a rattling noise, that is the sound of wind blowing the soffit of my shop. Not much I can do about that, so we'll just have to work with it. But like I was saying, I homed it on the center of that board so that I can flip it around and do the other side. And I've got a 1/2-inch spiral upcut bit to make the cuts. Okay, so this is what I really love about the X-Carve. While it works and cuts out those parts, I'm going to come over here and work on the dados on the actual cabinet part of the pull cue rack, where the shelves will be that hold the cue balls. So while that is making that part, we're going to sit over here. I'm going to set you guys up, and we're going to cut dados on the table saw. So with that side done, I can now take the board out and flip it. You can see there's a lot of fuzz on this. I think it's because my tooling's pretty dull. That 1/4-inch bit I've used a ton. It's not super sharp. So I will flip the board and then run the other side. It's a mirror image pattern. I just had to flip the design and easel to the other side. Just mirror it basically. I think all in all this carve took 15 minutes. So once I take it out of the CNC, I'm just going to run it through my wide belt on a 150 grit to knock that fuzz off and clean everything up. It's super easy and it looks really good. So with that done, I've got this back support piece that goes against the wall. I need to match those dados. So I'm just using those dados to lay out the dados on this piece, and I'll transfer them over with my square, and then use the exact same setup on my table saw that I was previously using to run those dados. As I'm doing it, I just walk over and kind of test to make sure everything's lining up. Those need to line up perfectly together in order for this to work. So with that cut, now I've got the two legs to the cabinet, the long vertical pieces that need to nest into these dados. So I need to put a little notch on those so that it's flush to that back piece. So when it rests against the wall, it'll rest flush to the wall. So I just kind of lay it out by hand and then go back to my dado and just make consecutive cuts to clear that waste out. Just slowly raising the blade till I get it where I want it. The fit looks good. I can slide that piece on first and then just drop the bottom shelf right in, and that locks everything in place. So with that section of the cabinet done, we're going to work on the top rail, which clips the pull cues in place. And while that CNC is running, I'm making mortises for that back kind of chair back frame that goes inside the wall cabinet. And so I just use my plunge router with a 3/8 bit and then come up and square the holes up with my 3/8 chisel. As I watch this, I wish that I could do two things at once like I'm doing right now. But obviously I'm switching out the workpiece on the CNC, flipping it over to do the mirror image of the other side of that top shelf. And then it's done. So with those mortises squared off, I can test fit my rail. Just make sure it fits good. And move on to cutting the mortises for the vertical slats. So I just use the same deal, 3/8 with the plunge router. I've got 5 of these to cut. They're 1/4 inch deep. And then I'll come back and square them off real quick with a chisel. It's pretty easy. There goes one done there. So with that done, the CNC is just about done running this program. I switched bits in the middle of this cut. The first half I used a 1/4 inch and it splintered like crazy, and then I switched over to an 1/8 inch and it worked way better. So I'm still trying to figure out what bits work best in certain scenarios. You can see I didn't quite cut deep enough on that. I just took it to my planer and cleaned it up. So for the 3 shelves, I actually I used a box core bit and I just set my these are indentions to hold the balls, and I just set my diameter to 1.25 inches and set my tool path to go inside that 1.25 inch diameter circle with the box core bit that's about 1 inch wide. And it didn't quite work out. What actually happened was the bit, it centers the bit on the tool path, so it actually cut a bigger circle. It ended up being quite a bit more than 1.25 inches, and I cut a little too deep into this. So I'm just kind of having to play around with different parameters to get where I want. You can see I've got 2 inches there, so it's not quite what I'm going for. So I came back and reduced the diameter of that circle down to, I think I did 3/4. And I did my tool path, I think, on this actual line. And it actually came out better, but it wasn't quite there yet. It's still a little bit bigger, and I cut a little less depth on this one as well. I went 1/4 inch as opposed to 3/8. You can see the improved size there. And I am getting a lot of burn in this as well. It was a pain to go back and clean that out. And I think it was because the bit was dull. So this is my final attempt at it. I think I went a lot less deep on this one, and it came out looking good. It's exactly what I was looking for. So when I have that figured out, I can set up now and cut the 3 shelves, no problem. Fairly quick program here. This took about, I think, 5 minutes to carve. But like I said, I did get quite a bit of burn on that bit. I think it was dull. So while that's carving, I want to cut dados in my top shelf that will hold those upright sides to the cabinet. So I'm just going to use the bottom shelf to lay it out and mark it as a reference, and then go cut the dados on the table saw. Okay, so with all those dados cut now, I have all the joinery done and the shelves done. I can assemble it. So I start by assembling that back frame with the 5 slats, and then once I get those together, I can install that into the sides of the cabinet. And I'll do that glue up first and clamp that up and let that sit for a while. That way, I did this glue up in like 3 or 4 stages just to make things simple. It's always easier that way than trying to rush it and put a million clamps on something. So while that is drying, I did go ahead and slide in my shelves. I just slide them in the back of the Dedos, put a little glue in there, and put some clamps to pull them tight. So those will be locked in place. So once that all dried, I took the clamps off, and then I always like to level and flush things out with my hand plane. I'm using a Stanley 4.5 here to just bring those shelves level with the sides and make sure everything's flush and clean looking. This is the best way to do things, I think. The other option would be a random orbital sander, but it will not work as well as a hand plane. So with that main case together, I can now cap the bottom shelf and the top, what will hold the pull cues. And it's fairly simple. I've got the dados cut. The top one's easy, just hammered in. This bottom one was a little tricky, as you can tell. I had to use a clamp to pull those 2 legs together because they were about a 1/16 off. So I just used a clamp, pulled it together, and hammered it in. Kind of a little brute force and ignorance always works in those situations. So I put clamps down the length just to kind of suck everything tight together, and then I come back and I'm putting screws in the top. As much as I hate using fasteners, you know, this is all the weight is going to be hanging off this top shelf, off the cleat, so I want to make sure that it's not going to pull off, and a dado is not going to hold that. So I need to put in shelves. The other option would be to do a through wedge tin in there, a couple of them, but you know, that's just not really how I designed the piece and wasn't really in the budget. So, you know, a couple screws with some plugs will do the trick. So the last thing to glue on is that top wall cleat that's going to use as a hanger. You can see I step it off the back edge about 1/2 inch so that when you screw the cleat to the wall, you can just reach up and hang it on that cleat, and that's what supports it on the wall. So for the finish, I'm using Sherwin-Williams acrylic lacquer. The acrylic lacquer is non-yellowing, so it works really well on maple. So first I have to shoot a vinyl sealer on there. It's basically a sanding sealer. I'll spray a coat of that, sand it with 320, and then come back and hit it with a couple coats of the acrylic lacquer. And that should handle the finish on this. Real simple, real easy, and fast. That lacquer dries quick and it sprays on real fast. So the last final step on this, once I had the finish on, is I have these little plastic clips, and the CNC on the top shelf was designed to fit these particular plastic clips. I just found these online, and the pull cue will actually be able to clip in and hold in place. So they just fit nice and snug in these little cutouts in the wood, and there's a little bit of room in that cutout for the expansion of the plastic to open and close and lock that cue in place. With that done, that is the last step of the project. Okay, so there it is, all done. Unfortunately, I don't own any pull equipment gear, so I can't load it up with pull cues and balls and a triangle for you. But you can kind of use your imagination. I do have one cue here I used. You can see it sitting in the hole down there. And then I've got these clips up here that help clip it in and hold it in place. Obviously, we've got the little dowel to hold our triangle, and then a spot for our cue balls. Really a cool project, a lot of fun, a great balance between CNC work and regular machines and even hand tool work. I'm still learning a lot on the CNC. There's a pretty big learning curve on it, but I do enjoy using it. So a big thanks to X-Carve on the CNC. If you guys are interested in learning more about that machine, I have a link in the description. You can go check it out. I do use it on a lot of my builds, mostly for jigs, but you can see in this build how we were able to use it for actual joinery, for cutting out these holes, dados, and those cool little pockets to fit these clips. So it comes in handy, and when you're using it, you're doing something else. So it's almost like adding another man to the shop once you figure it out. So as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Remember, you can support the channel by heading over to Bunker Branding and buying t-shirts, hats, all the cool stuff I have over there. As always, thanks a lot, and I will see you next time.